So just a few words for those of you. What? Who are you? For those of you who are not familiar with what we do after the meditation now, is we just have an open discussion. So any question you have about the meditation practice that any of us have said in the last 10 or 20 years that you'd like to have explained, or to complain about them. Really, it's about the meditation and how things are going, and it's really not possible to become really good at meditation without having a source of support. It's really important. So we try to give a little bit of that in these open discussions, and then it's up to you to make your connection with other teachers or other members of the community to pick up some pointers and things and to give some. So I think the way we say this is the ball's in your court. Swing.
Michael, could you have often said that, well, actually you haven't often said it, but recently said that the four immeasurables were the core of every practice, and I was wondering if you could say something about that.
I think it's helpful to start at a slightly different place. A teaching that I heard a long time ago, maybe as much as 30 years, was that any of the teachings of the Dharma, if you look at them close enough and your meditation is mature enough, you will recognize that the entire teachings, the entire body of the Dharma is contained within every small piece of the Dharma. And I remember way back then that was sort of a fascinating proposition, but it also had certain elements about it that were empowering, in that if that were true, then any practice that I felt drawn to, I could imagine that it contained all of the elements that were necessary in order to contain complete enlightenment, in order to come to that place. And so in one way, when Tara's raising the issue of the four immeasurables, it's really just another example of taking a small body of the teaching and elaborating it forward. And it's been my experience that actually those small bodies of teaching can be elaborated into pretty much the whole system. So the four immeasurables, I don't want to get into a detailed description of them, but just to say what they are, the four immeasurables are comprised of four principles. The first one, they're actually not always given in the exact same order, so I will start with the more common approach, which is the four immeasurables are comprised of immeasurable loving kindness. That is to say, as a meditation practice, it's a practice of generating love and kindness for others and compassion for those who are suffering. Then we make the wish that those beings will be freed, not only of the experience of suffering, but the causes of suffering. And the same in the loving kindness, to be free of suffering there, that they will be free of the suffering that comes to them through a myriad of causes, and that they will also experience loving kindness for others. And the third one is joy. And the joy is meant to be a joy that we have. There's a number of ways, again, to describe this, but I'll give you maybe one of my favorites, which is that when you see somebody do something, or somebody says something, and that thing that they have done or they said appears to be something which is actually virtuous, whether accidentally or intentional, something that will be helpful for them, for that person, and helpful for others who contact that person. In other words, it's a beneficial, virtuous seed to just be planted in the world, you might say. And seeing that and recognizing the virtue of it, then we naturally feel a sense of joy at that happening. And the practice then is to build that, elaborate it. So the fourth one is equanimity. And this is the real meaning of immeasurable. It's not immeasurable, grand, huge loving kindness or joy. It's that it is visited upon uncountable beings. So that's the immeasurable piece, is that it's for all beings, without measure, without discrimination of any kind. And so from that we get immeasurable equanimity, which is the fourth one. So the equanimity, by definition, is for all beings. The equanimity takes the previous three and turns them into something truly grand. So in essence, that's what I think we're looking at. Okay?
Aren't they also connected to Chinrezi?
Well, without getting into the details of that, if it seems that every particle contains every particle, then the question whether or not they're connected to Chenrezi has the obvious answer of yes, of course it does. But you will say that with Shine, also with calm abiding, with compassion practice, with mind training practice, like all of those things contain those elements. And sometimes we look too far to find the important kernel of truth when actually we're already working with it. So I think that's one of the benefits of thinking that all of the practices contain the pieces that are of importance in all the other practices. It's a nice way to approach all of the other practices, just to come at it from a kind of good feeling model, which, as you know, I'm not particularly fond of. But nonetheless, there it is, that if we are engaging in practice and we find that something is very difficult for us to do, but we also know that this other practice we find easy to do, then we have a certain sense of connection, a thread between them, that we can't know all of these things easily. I think authentically we would say that takes multiple lifetimes to do that. Of course, I'm always cynical enough to say, well, how do we know which lifetime we're in? Maybe we already have all those things. But that aside, I think, yeah, it's an example of finding the core truth in all the aspects of the body of teaching. Okay? Say yes.
Yes.
Phew.
Good evening, Lama Michael. So I have a roommate who, over the holidays, had an interesting question, and I'm pretty sure it's a common one that a lot of people have. And of course, I had my own answer to the question, but I thought maybe you could say a bit about their question was essentially how enlightenment and ignorance can exist side by side in the same person. And so I figured that's a fairly common question a lot of people have, and that's probably fun to explain, so I thought maybe you could say a few words on that.
Did you say kind of funny? Is that what you said?
It's kind of fun to explain.
Oh, fun. Oh, really? Do it.
Well, you wanted a ball thrown, so I'm sending you one. Turn this thing off.
How was that you characterized that just a moment ago?
How enlightenment and ignorance can exist.
Enlightenment and what else?
And ignorance.
And ignorance.
Yes.
What is
Or
ignorance?
nature and ignorance.
What is ignorance?
Confusion or the
Confusion.
questions and things like that.
Okay.
Want me to say it on the mic?
Enlightenment and confusion.
Enlightenment and ignorance, or enlightenment and confusion, or Buddha nature and confusion, the kleshas, vasana, things like
Yeah.
that can exist within the same person.
Yeah.
Potential for good and bad.
Well, obviously, one of the key teachings is that not only do we all have the potential to attain enlightenment, we all have an awakened mind. And the stories that I like the most personally are not the ones that talk about how you're going to take a mind which is less than awakened and you're going to somehow do something to it so that it really wakes up. And the story that, again, is my favorite is when the Buddha goes through a town, of course, 2,000 years ago, and some man comes out and asks him why it is that he is enlightened and the Buddha is enlightened, that he isn't. Like, what's the difference between the two? And the Buddha says there isn't any difference. Like, there just isn't any difference. And if there is a difference, it's not in the nature of that mind or in you. The difference is that I recognize that awakened mind, which is already the natural inheritance of any human being or any living thing. And you don't recognize it. And that basically is the line between awakening and ignorance. Not recognizing it, then we're ignorant of that awakened mind, right? That's basically what it is. And then we engage in our life from that perspective, doing things which often cause ourselves and others harm, because we don't recognize not only our own primordially pure nature, but we also then, of course, even more, don't recognize it in others. Okay? You got a better one? Hey, I'm open to it. You know? That's right.
Something I've always appreciated about our tradition is that it seems like instead of just accepting something as fact or as true. We're encouraged to investigate it and practice it and see for ourselves what effect it has in our life. But something for me that has been a little bit more challenging is the idea of reincarnation, and trying to believe in that without having any experience, seemingly, myself of that, and what to do with that prerogative to kind of believe in it without having known that I've practiced it or having that experience.
So what was the question exactly?
I guess the question is, can you provide any guidance on understanding or the role of reincarnation in our tradition within, I guess, I wouldn't say blind belief, but I don't know how to accept that as a belief without having tried it out myself or known that I've tried it out myself. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, sure. I'm on your side. I think it's a great question to ponder. In my own experience, I would say that most of the last 20 or 30 years, I've felt very skeptical about not necessarily about the teachings on it, but about the thing itself. When we talk about reincarnation, we're talking about something that even many Tibetan teachers, if they heard us talk about it, they'd say we have it all wrong, that that's not correct. So it's troublesome in a lot of ways, but it becomes kind of clear if you can put aside the belief issue. Do I have to believe it? And if so, how do I get there? How much of my personal integrity do I have to betray in order to believe that thing? Is when you find yourself engaging in that question, you're really, I think you've discovered that actually the approach is not correct. A very close friend of mine from a long time ago, once he went to a retreat that we were doing, and afterwards he was saying that he didn't believe it. And I said, I actually don't believe it either, which was kind of shocking at the time, I think, for him. But fundamentally, it looks to me like the ideal position would not to have any belief at all. But that implies that we actually, for most of it, it means we have to disbelieve as opposed to believe. In other words, what do we have when we don't have certainty? Then living with uncertainty is difficult, so we generally fill that space in with some kind of belief. But if you look at it close, you might come to the conclusion that you actually have no idea. Like, is that a functional concept or a functional view to hold, that we experience multiple lifetimes? And pretty much all of the great teachers will say yes. The problem becomes gnarly when it comes down to more specific things. You will not get proof by virtue of, especially as confused beings that we are, we don't have access to that. We can't remember, we can't project it, we can't see it happen with others. All the normal tools that we use in order to confirm and verify things don't apply. So we come to a place where I think a more helpful beginning point is to look at it and say it could be, and maybe it isn't. But it's probably true in either case that whatever level of understanding I have is not correct. This friend of mine said, I don't see any evidence that shows that this sort of thing happens. But on the other hand, the issue was, well, you don't have any evidence against it either. They're exactly on a par with each other. So, well, what are you going to do with that? And his response was, I'm going to disbelieve it. I said, well, that's, in my world, you know, this is a 1 and that's a 1. It's like you haven't gone anywhere. So you're pretending that you've gone somewhere. It actually just isn't there. And if we don't add baggage to the idea and we just keep pondering it and wondering about it and being careful about what we read, there's some really nice books on it that don't demand that we believe something blindly, that explore the issue a bit, we can come to a conclusion. So I'll just give you my conclusion, which is that if I had to choose between an unbounded period, an unbounded, in other words, no boundary to the period of experience. So my experience, I don't know when it began, so I say it has no beginning. The end of my experience, normally, culturally, we would say when you're dead. You're dead, your experience is over. But actually, we have no evidence for that. We think we do because the corpse doesn't appear to be responding to anything. But that actually doesn't mean that whatever animated that corpse at some point isn't currently experiencing something. Like, we have to come back to this place of, I still don't know what this is. If we can't do that, there's another little piece which is worth pondering. In the mystical tradition, if you cannot hold open the possibility that your experience has no beginning and no end, and that the body is only one piece of it passing through in one lifetime, then you fundamentally, I think, bar yourself from the more deep experiences that you might encounter. So there's a reason why not to deny it, and I think that the reason to not deny it is the same reason to not believe it. Both of those concretize and solidify things.
Thank you. Does that, would you say that's kind of related to the holding the unbounded view? Is that what's meant by, yeah?
Yeah, normally we encounter the unbounded view as in a more, it's usually done like in this example. We start with some kind of an example and then we follow it through. But the unbounded view is the basis of all of the deepest teachings. Like if we talk about our lifespan as being the time in which we experience things as a human being, we've really reduced the potential dramatically and with no evidence for or against it. So in order to go deep into some of the teachings, it's really critical to not carry the baggage of, I will say from my side, either belief or disbelief. They're both baggage. Do either of you want to say something about that? It's such an enjoyable topic.
Yeah. One little story comes to mind back in the early 90s when I think it was either the first or second year that Dora and I went to the Mahamudra seminar with Bokar Rinpoche. And there was a moment where he touched on this, and he said, well, I myself have no concrete evidence that reincarnation is true in the literal sense that it's presented. But over my decades of practice, I get some indications that it's more like that. So I thought it's a little bit like the Pope saying, well, I'm not so sure about heaven, I can't, but maybe, there's something there. So even kind of the holder of the lineage would not make it concrete in that way. And I often go back myself to just looking to say, well, if I could really have absolute clarity about how experience unfolds one moment to the next, right in front of my, quote, very eyes, I might then think, well, if I'm that nailed down, then I'll go and try and figure out this other thing. But if I don't see clearly what's unfolding right in front of me right now, or even understand the dimension of what all the different multiple dimensions of experience as it unfolds, then I start there. But it's very helpful for me to recognize that there's so much, however it's described, whatever particular story is put on it, there's so much momentum that has come, that is passing through my experience now. And this momentum carries on, and we can watch that kind of momentum, however it is we explain it. We can watch the momentum pass on beyond people's lives. So there are a lot of ways to look at it, but I think it's more helpful to think in those terms than in a very kind of narrow sense. It does the things that allow us to open our attention, open our exploration, I think are more helpful.
Just adding, I don't remember if it was that time or in a different recording that we heard Bokh Rinpoche also say that, well, if it's true that there are future lives, then it really matters what I do in this life if it goes the way the teachings say, that I'll experience results based on what I'm doing in this life. So if it's not true, it won't hurt if I've acted like it was true. Whereas if it's true and I didn't behave like I thought it was true, then I could be sorry. So he was saying you could hedge your bets by acting as if it were true.
Okay, if I may. Just a sec. I know proof, there is no proof, but when we take the Dalai Lamas, when we take the Karmapas, we take the Tulkus, and then we take all over the place, or in India where people talk about the reincarnation as matter of fact. And they go like, you Europeans, how come? So what I'm trying to say, as a student of Karl Marx, I'm probably not inclined to believe something and to have faith, right? But I based my understanding on evidence, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama is for me an evidence of continuity of stream of consciousness. Or am I mistaken?
Even the most authoritative teachers in our tradition that I've known, no one has ever said to me, "You really should believe this." I've never heard that, and it's a good thing, because that would have caused a bit of a rift. It's like I've never met anyone who said, "You need to believe this," where I thought that was any kind of reason why I should need to believe it. It's like we look for these things and explore these things. That's really helpful, I think, to do. I guess in the most practical terms, I can say from my own side, I actually don't care whether it is true or not true, or somewhere in between, or not an issue of truth, but an issue of something else. I can imagine so many different things. But I also mostly believe that this is not an objective thing. It's not an objective thing. There's certainly, as far as I can see, there isn't any objective evidence that's compelling to me. And there's a lot of evidence, but it's just not compelling. I'll tell you what's compelling, though. As a human being in the Western culture, the likelihood that you would just naturally believe in reincarnation is pretty small. Pretty small. That, of course, is no evidence one way or the other. It's just a fact, I think, pretty small. But what's interesting is the practice aspect, because that's actually what we're about. As practicing Buddhists, we could ask the question also, do you have a mind? And that's a fascinating thing to run around in. But you run around in that, you just end up as confused as you were before you started. So the practices are far more interesting. And when it comes to the practice of reincarnation, of course there are deep practices, meditation practices for that. But aside from that, there are other practices that we can engage in that are really interesting and helpful. So I'm going to tell you a personal experience. There was a Lama whose name I won't mention, but he was quite renowned as a kind of crazy guy, which is to say, highly intelligent. and I somehow, by circumstances, ended up spending a couple of weeks with him walking around San Francisco mostly. And standing in the Union Square one day, we were talking about these things, and we talked about quite a few things which I'm not going to go into, but the one that was really interesting was, he said, why don't you take 1 week, because your meditation is reasonably okay, and you imagine that reincarnation is true. You imagine that reincarnation is true. You just hold it as a view. Kind of like, you comb your hair. I don't, but some people do. They comb their hair and then they look in the mirror to see if everything is just right. Why don't you use it like a mirror? What difference would it make in your life? And he wasn't saying that it wouldn't make a difference. I think actually he was saying that this will make a gigantic difference. You hold the view, definitely, of reincarnation for 1 or 2 weeks. Everyone that you meet, you think, I have met this person before. Because if it's true, it's universal. Looks like. Easy to imagine it's universal. If it's there at all, everybody has it. It's not like some people have it and some people don't. That seems more difficult. So you take the easy one. You have it. And by extension, every sentient being, not just humans, but every sentient being has been your mother, your father, if you're an ant, your fellow ant, all these things. And you approach every person with that in mind. Start with whatever you want. Since you're a human being, start with a human being. So you walk into the supermarket and you look around and you see people and you think, these people have been my parents, even though I've never seen them in this life before. Then you approach them, you talk to them. And you talk through the voice of, I'm speaking to my mother from other lives who does not know me. And of course, I'm kind, so I'm not going to tell her that she's my mother, because then probably they'll have to remove me from the store or something. And so I just have a conversation, and I hold that it's a very private understanding. Is it true? I don't care. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, the final instruction was, at the end of a week, having done 1 week where you definitely do not have that, in other words, everyone you meet, you have never met before and will never meet again in any circumstance whatsoever, as opposed to you've met over and over and over. At the end of 2 weeks, look at the two pieces, those two ways of relating to the world, and just ask yourself the question, which would you rather have if you could only have one? That was a fascinating turning point. So he wasn't saying, believe it. Really, the instruction was, do not abandon the view. Always inquire into this. That was for me a great turning point in this whole discussion, which I think is still interesting in most ways, but in another way for me is totally settled. Not by belief, but by just experience of the grandiosity of relating to every being as someone that you already have an intimate connection with from long ago, over and over again. And there's another aspect to it. It's fun. It's enjoyable. You feel connected.
I guess I'm one of those exceptions. For me, the reincarnation is quite clear cut. But that makes sense. That makes much more sense than for ethical reasons, for logical reasons, for ethical reasons. Yeah. It makes sense, but I do not believe in it. I don't be. I truly don't believe in. I try not to believe in anything. Right?
You disbelieve it?
Several times, or I would, but I just go by partial evidence or evidence, not proof. Yeah, you know the difference. Not proof, just circumstantial evidence sometimes even. But when I see really His Holiness. And he is 14th, and etc. There is something, and I'm not I don't make any personification. I know that it's not the ego which goes through. I think it's not the ego which goes through, but something that it makes sense. The continuity, the principle of continuity makes more sense than principle of discontinuity. Like that I'm born and then I go into nothingness makes less sense than I was never born, the stream was never born and will never disappear. The same way as this the whole thing around us, right? But I don't believe, yeah, that's true. Thank you anyway.
I have a question about the practice. I've been coming here for a couple of years, and until very recently, it was very difficult for me to relate to this loving kindness, compassion, or like all the practice. And it's not like I don't have feelings. I do have feelings, but it was very difficult somehow, like my relation to those that is more like superficial. It's not like, yeah, it was very superficial. That's how I feel. And recently, like a series of life events happened, and I am kind of forced to open myself. What I'm trying to say is that, why I'm saying open myself up is because I kind of, I have come to this glimpse of realization that I have a lot of fear, and especially like a fear of being hurt. So in order for me to protect myself not to be hurt, I put a lot of barriers around me. And but those barriers are not really working anymore. So it's like a good for nothing barriers at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and I was really protecting myself from this and that, so that I don't get hurt, or I don't go into this uncomfortable area. But that's not working anymore. And but then I needed to open myself up, but at the same time, when it's that is happening, I also started feeling more, and kind of like a little bit easier to relate this feeling of compassion or loving kindness. And my question is, somebody maybe like me, to practice not on a superficial way, but a little bit in deeper level, is this, this opening up is a prerequisite? You know what I'm trying to say?
I think so. Is that it?
Yes.
And so I don't have, and maybe you don't have a question?
And that's my question.
The question, can we rephrase it once?
Okay. So, to practice deeply is it required for us to opening ourselves more?
Yeah.
So no, no, maybe if you have some kind of barriers. In my case, I had at least, or I still have, but so many layers of barriers. But you
experienced those.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I started seeing it.
I see.
Yeah. Yeah.
I see.
But once I started kind of I needed to remove the barrier, or I am forced to remove the barrier. I started feeling a little bit more close to this practice, you know, like or like Chenrezig, or like a feeling the compassion. Like people are talking about compassion all the time, but until very recently, it was just a word for me. I really did not feel, you know, like truly in my heart compassion. You know, like now I kind of started feeling like people in my circumstances, whatever it is, you know, like I started feeling their pain or difficulty and things like this. More like, you know, like not like them, me, but, you know, like together kind of, feeling.
Yeah. So when you have that experience, what do you do? You have the experience of feeling the pain of another or others.
Yeah.
Then what do you do in that place?
Like last time when on Wednesday when I was here for Chenrezig practice, and when we were reciting mantra, you know, like I was thinking about those people who might be or who are in the same position like I am, so that, you know, like we can kind of, you know, like feel better, or pain will go away. That's what I did.
Yeah, I'm not clear on what it is we're looking for here exactly. So
You mentioned, is it a prerequisite?
Yes.
Is it a prerequisite that you open like this in order to have contact with these teachings?
Yes. That's my question. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Sorry.
You feel like it is a prerequisite?
I feel like it.
I see.
Yeah.
And you have not met the prerequisite?
No.
Really?
No.
But some, a little bit. She's eating it now. She's saying that it's starting to happen.
Yeah.
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 You know, the fundamental obstacle from a kind of formal teaching perspective, the fundamental obstacle always comes down to hope and fear. Those are, from the confused perspective, what drive us to all the things that we do, including the good things. It's like we're continually hoping for something and fearing we won't get it. It's just it's almost part of our nature. Of course, it's not really the inherent part of our nature, because that's enlightenment. But the obstacle can always be kind of starting with hope and fear and finding it in ourselves. Like, where's the hope? Where's the fear? What am I afraid of? And finding that fear, we don't need an antidote for it. So that's also, if you can avoid trying to eliminate the fear, but just being present with it, in other words, just seeing it. It's kind of like, this is a very beautiful yellow rose. I don't need to do anything to it to make it more beautiful. In fact, anything I could do to it would make it less beautiful. So in the same way, the deep perspective, so we're doing a lot of this deep stuff tonight, but the deep perspective is you see your own hope and you see your own fear. You see what you want and the fear that you won't get it. Or you see what you fear and the hope that it won't happen to you. It's like these things are always doing that. The antidote is not to eliminate the fear. The fear is not the problem. The problem is the attachment to be rid of it. Once we give that up, that fear is powerless. It gets all of its power, not from anywhere other than us, who experience it, and who want to be rid of it. So when you have that fear, a really excellent practice is you put your awareness on that experience. Just simple.
What experience?
The experience of the fear.
Okay.
Or the hope. It doesn't really, they're the same. They're just opposite sides of the same coin. Hope and fear. There is no fear without hope. They feed off each other. They feed into each other. So they're really just the same thing. We don't know that. We want our hope to manifest, and we want the fear to get out. But it's the same thing. So the push and pull doesn't work. And yet, if you can stop and just look at the fear, literally, like you stop, you do your meditation, you feel the fear, whether you put that name on it or not, you have an experience. Even better is just having an experience. And I'm just looking at that experience. And the experience will disappear, of course. They all do. And so while you're putting your awareness on that fear, on the experience of something we call fear, gradually you'll come to the place of realizing, it's not there. So it's not permanently gone, but it also, when it comes again, it's not the same fear. It's another fear. So the one that comes and plagues us, we never had before, and it never comes again. It just keeps being reinvented. And we keep reinventing it by saying, there's that fear again. I have this problem again. I'm having to open myself again. When actually, you probably already did. And then another feeling came, and then it felt like you were closed, not open at all. The very best meditation, which will bear fruit in all of the meditations, I think we could say, is to just put your awareness on that experience. With no hope, so that's not easy. But in time, the fear piece is that we're afraid of something. It's kind of like snakes and insects. We're afraid of them. But we also know there are people who have no fear of them. They pick up snakes, they pick up insects, they do all sorts of things, and they don't have any fear at all. They're just fine. We can have that relationship with our experience by just continually putting our awareness on it, and in essence, in a kind of corny way, make friends with it. It's not the enemy. It's just hope and fear. And it'll be there until we can just be present with it. It's not going to go somewhere else, because there isn't anything there to go anywhere else. It gets reinvented on a more or less continuous basis. And you can witness that because you know how to meditate. You can witness that. And you don't have to be like some fantastic meditator. You can just look and see. Just like if I give you a compliment, and then I could say, "Oh, Kiko, you look very well tonight." And so then I could say, now that gives you a feeling, doesn't it? You have some feeling from that. Look at that feeling. Nothing else, just look at it. And then, when that feeling is gone, there's another one there. There's some other feeling there. Just look at that feeling. And gradually, as you come to the hope and the fear, primarily I think fear is our biggest issue, we think. But that's because we haven't encountered the hope yet. Hope is just as big as fear because it's the same thing. So you can put your awareness on it and just settle with it. You don't have to like it or dislike it or anything. But we already know from experience what arises in the mind can be fearful, can be attractive, pleasant, unpleasant, but by the time we've been sitting for 5 minutes, the things that we were first looking at are all gone, and they've been replaced by substitutes who show up. So you just need to look at these things, and then you recognize they have no power. The power is not coming from them. The power is coming from me. I visit my fear on it, and they become powerful. Because I don't want the fear, the aversion is the manifestation of the empowerment. You have all the means already. Does that sound too magical?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. All right.
But I will practice that way then. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you're going to report in, right?
Yes.
Okay.
In a month.
That's good. By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state. Thank you all. Very nice evening.